kick off with our main news today, should we? Better had. Kemi Badenoch has lashed out at Brexiteers after they accused the government of U-turning on that promise to bin all EU law by the end of the year.
Well, Tory backbenchers are angry at the climb down over the so-called post-Brexit bonfire pledge, but the business secretary hit back, saying they're all talk and no action. Let's talk to former Conservative Adviser Claire Pearsall, who joins us now. Claire, morning to you. We were promised this, weren't we? I mean, this was part of the whole point of Brexit, that we were running our own laws.
Well, we were, and I think this is yet another sign of the over-promising by the Prime Minister and his top team. It was never going to be really possible to do this by the end of the year, to have all of these sunset clauses without scrutinising the legislation that you're trying to unpick. You've got 40 plus years of regulation coming through and no real clear understanding of how that works together. Now, there could be problems with other pieces of legislation on the statute books already. You don't know the consequences of unpicking one, what that will have on another. And I would much rather have this go through properly and not just quickly, and have the Brexit that we were all promised in the first place. I think the timescale was wrong, and I think this is just the Prime Minister setting these targets to appease people without having the wherewithal to work out if he could get it done.
The only thing that I would question about that, Claire, is I heard an expert talking about this 6 months ago, saying actually any half-decent legal team, you know, of 4 or 5 people could get this done in 6 months. It's not as complicated, he was saying, as it's made out to be.
I think the problem you have is the setup of government, to be honest. When you look at these departments, how big they are, it's not as simple as saying one legal team can have a look at 4,000 pieces of legislation and work out what you do with them. Each department will have its own set of responsibilities. Each minister will have its own set of responsibilities. And I think the burden is not shared equally across those government departments. Someone like DEFRA, for example, the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Department, has more pieces of legislation than others. So it isn't quite as easy as saying a team of 5 people sit round a table and unpick it until it's done. There is an awful lot that goes on, and some cross-departmental working that needs to be carved out as well. And that's never simple when it comes to government.
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Brexiteer and the GB News presenter, he's blamed Whitehall for this. He said it's an inability of Whitehall to do necessary work and the incapability of ministers to push things through their own departments. He's called this the triumph of the Blob. What do you make of those comments?
I think he's partially right, and he is a very clever man, and I wouldn't ever like to go against his knowledge. But I think that to blame civil servants is probably a little unfair. It is the ministers who should be setting the timetable. Now, if there is pushback from civil servants, then that needs to be sorted out. But I don't think that you can entirely put this complicated process upon those people. There is an awful lot that needs to be done within government, and I think you are looking at departments which don't have enough staff in. Now, there could be an argument for coming back to the office, which I know that Jacob is very keen on. That could have a part to play in this. But I think that it needs to be shared equally alongside those ministers and staff within the government to see how much they actually know about the process, what they're looking at, and how much scrutiny is going to take place, because it's an awful lot of responsibility to lay upon one minister, for example, as to unpick this or leave it and it disappears. So I think it's probably right to remove that timetable. It was unreachable, but the Prime Minister needs to work on his expectation management. He's not showing that he's very good at that, as we've seen with the local elections.
Well, the problem is, and this sort of feeds into the local elections really with all of this, is that what we did see was Labour doing quite well in areas which were quite heavily pro-Brexit. Now, again, this is going to feed into that. This is going to leave the government with bigger problems trying to convince those people who backed them in 2019 to back them again at some point next year.
You're quite right. When you look at the split of voting, the Conservative Party didn't do well in Leave or Remain areas. And if you're going to look at those Leave areas, especially in the red wall seats, those people lent their votes to the Conservative Party and they feel betrayed. So if you don't look after somebody's vote, they're not going to follow you in the future. So I think it's been a huge mistake. And it just puts fuel on the fire of those people who wanted to remain in the EU by saying, oh, this is unachievable. So we have managed to alienate pretty much everybody. And unless you come up with a realistic timetable, what you're going to do, and a clear and transparent layout of this legislation that you're unpicking, tell us what it is. We need to understand a little bit more. You can't hide behind oh, this is a little bit difficult. You need to be a lot more transparent than that. I think the public deserves to know, and especially considering the majority voted for Brexit, and that hasn't been delivered.
And Claire, this has been a really tough week, hasn't it, for Rishi Sunak? First of all, losing more than 1,000 seats in the local election, and now fighting off what could be a rebellion in the backbenches, because he has essentially broken a promise, hasn't he? I mean, one of the cornerstones of his Tory leadership campaign was that there would be this sunset on EU law. And there's now going to be a climb down from that, isn't there?
That's right. If we all remember back to the summer of last year, Rishi Sunak had a very slick video with him putting a lot of paperwork of EU regulations through the shredder. He promised to do this. And I think to come now to May of 2023 and say, actually, no, I can't do it, it's not looking good. And we seem to bounce at the moment from a little bit of stability and a little bit of quiet to absolute chaos again. And there seems to be no middle ground. There's no managing of the process going forward. And I haven't seen anything that's come through to suggest he has a plan to deal with this. He sent Kemi Badenoch into the chamber of the House of Commons yesterday, which didn't go well. The anger on the backbenches was palpable. And there isn't anything coming forward as to what his plans actually are. So don't go and promise something in a slick video that you're not going to deliver.
OK. Claire, as always, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Love your thoughts on that this morning.